Perfect. You have a grasp on the use cases for an OpenAI block. Now let's jump into the meat here, which is going to be your ChatGPT block. Let's learn everything we need to know about the ChatGPT block. So when we approach AI automations, we are going to be really well versed and be able to do a lot of stuff. As always, your main event when using a ChatGPT block is going to be conversation. So if you didn't have a chance to watch our Zapier tutorial in the course, go ahead and check that out as we describe all this information that falls below the user prompt here. But essentially the two main things we're going to be looking at in this video is going to be the user message and the memory key. Okay, so let's go ahead and begin. Let's go ahead and show you everything you need to know about step by step when creating a prompt for whatever you may be doing. First thing you always want to do is just give context. So essentially you do context, and then in these parentheses, you will input what action is being achieved. So what do I mean by that? Are we sending an email? Did we receive a message from a potential lead? Are we creating a video script? Are we creating social media captions? So this is the kind of thought process you should have at the very beginning of a prompt, because essentially we want a proctor GPT to understand, all right, here, start on the right foot. So everything after it is a little bit more context on what it should be achieving. One side note, it's very important that when you're structuring these prompts, use very effective dictation. You want to use as limited amount of words when providing the prompts, because this is going to be not only less data for GPT to understand, it's actually going to be cheaper for you in the long term when you scale, because every single one of these characters are going to be associated with a token usage by OpenAI. So let me go ahead and give an example of that. I'm going to go ahead and delete this. And let's just say we are going to do, okay, we are generating a body for an email for a potential client who seems to be interested. So we had that as a context, and we continue. But using more fine-tuned dictation here, let's go ahead and revamp it a little so we use less data. So we're going to go ahead and just delete this. We're going to say creating a body of an email for, I'm just going to ahead all this for interested client. Now, this might not seem like a big deal, but trust me, it really is. When you get in more complex AI automations, the amount of words you use within each user prompt is very important. It leaves less room for error. The more words you provide, the more chance you could have, probabilities and outcomes that are not within line what you're looking for. Perfect. Once we understand the context of what this specific block is going to do, we need to then tell it essentially what action to perform or what output we're looking for. So in this context, we like using the term generate. We're going to say generate the body of this email. Now, before that, there may be a chance where we need to use contextual data found previous in the flow. So typically the way we want to structure this is we'll give context. So in this, what we're doing here is creating a body of an email. And then preceding that, we need to give information that's going to probably be live data based off, maybe an email that we received. So to clarify, essentially the way you want to look at it is we want to go ahead and give GPT context, but data-oriented context. So we're going to email subject, email body. And then here in these little parentheses is where you're going to want to put the data of the subject, which would come from like a Gmail block, and then you would put the data of the body, which would come from the Gmail block as well. So essentially what we're doing here is we're giving context. Hey, we're creating a body of an email for an interested client, and then it's going to be like, okay, so who is this interested client then? We don't understand. This gives context that essentially the interested client, and we're going to go ahead and add this, make it more specific, client email subject and client email body. Now understands, okay, this was the email that that we need to respond to. Here's the data that's going to be live data inputted for every time the flow is ran. So maybe a new client comes in, we're going to have new subject line, new body. Now let's go ahead and generate the body of this email in response. And one little trick that you can do when proctoring generations is sometimes it can get annoying, where essentially in this context, let's say we generated this out, it says email body, semicolon, quotation marks, and then it gives you the email body. But what if we just want the email body itself? No text before or after. Quite literally just said it. All you need to tell ChatGPT is no text before or after the body. That phrasing right there, if I can speak, is going to help you a lot. Now, one thing I noticed that I glossed over real quick is the parentheses. Those are very important when inputting data. So what I mean by data essentially is previous blocks. So let's just assume we're using this data point. You always want to use parentheses for data points, as this allows GPT to compartmentalize it when it's looking at all the information you provide within your user message, so it doesn't like overlap with the generation flow or anything like that. All right, so now that we have essentially what's occurring, we may need to add a little bit more information so that it does the correct way or formatting for the output. And what we like to use here is called a parameter block. So we'll do parameter, and you always want to make sure you have your parameter block at the end of the user message. I wouldn't want to put the parameter block right after this, as you know, GPT doesn't necessarily always think chronologically, but in order to ensure effective outputs, have it at the end, because then it'll be like, okay, we understand what we're doing. All right, it looks like we have to do it within these constraints. So here are some examples of parameters. So we could do max 3 to 4 sentences. If you're dealing with social media captions, max 200 characters. And if you want specific keywords, use these words and use semicolon, quotation marks, fun. And then we're going to just add cost efficient. Now in the email, it knows to essentially use the word fun in it once, use the word cost efficient once. Also, notice how I identified the words that I want used. We use quotation marks to identify static text that you want to be inputted into a variable output. So just to be more clear on that, essentially due to the fact that this right here isn't a variable data point, it's a static text that we inputted that we want on every single flow. We want those two words. We're going to use quotation marks and not parentheses. So those are some examples on essentially parameters. Think of parameters as your way to really hone in ChatGPT and make sure it stays within boundaries that you set about your specific outputs. This can be used in a plethora of different use cases. I could have also added, only like 3 to 5 hashtags for dealing with social media. Another block we like to use, which is circumstantial, is going to be a format block. Now, in the context of using a format block, this is where you're going to be able to format for specific language types. And what I mean by that is essentially, let's say we want to say use HTML, use Python. Python wouldn't make sense in this context, but in this context, you were outputting code. That's where that would make sense. This is kind of where you want to give more language-oriented changes. So format could be use English, use Spanish. That is kind of where this comes into play. All right, so you have a really good idea of how to structure a prompt. Essentially, we want to give context, and then we want to give the variables that tend to be associated with that context. Then we want to give the action of generating whatever we want to generate. So for this, we're doing generating a body of an email. And then we could use format if it is needed within that block. And finally, we have a parameter block to really give the boundaries of our output. The next thing we really got to understand is going to be the memory key. So the memory key in itself is 32 characters, random string. The way we use a memory key, think of it like using traditional ChatGPT UI on the website. When you're just talking with ChatGPT traditionally, text to text, what you'll notice is that the further you get down in a conversation, it remembers stuff you said before, so it gives more context on later outputs. What does that mean for its API? Essentially, this is where we're going to ensure consistent outputs for formatting and also consistent outputs on variety. So what do I mean by that? Essentially, when we use a memory key and we generated the body once, we'll be able to make sure that we ensure that the body of the email has a similar style every single time. So let's say once we lock in our memory key, let's say our memory key is soccer. Once we lock in the memory key as soccer and we're satisfied with the output, And every single AI automation that occurs after that will have similar formatting. So there won't be quotation marks, or there won't be emojis, or maybe there will be emojis. It just depends on how you want your formatting output to occur. What does that mean? That means essentially that sometimes when you're dealing with structuring your user message, you may not even need to come back to the original user message and input more text or change anything. Your user message might be fine. All you may need to do in some context is simply add a 1 here or 2 here, change the memory key, retest the action, and if the output is more satisfactory, then there you go. You found your memory key you want to stick with for that specific output. So that is on the formatting and output side. What about the memory side? This is a big deal here. So essentially, think of it this way. What we get into later in this course is our AI article generator. And one of the big things about content creation and content generation, and basically this can be applied to a lot of things within business, is the idea that we don't want regurgitated information. As a reader, you wouldn't want to read the same article 2 weeks later, right? Therefore, using a memory key and then adding a line like this, for example, parameter, never repeat the same body. And this doesn't really make sense in this context because it wouldn't be able to repeat the same body due to the fact that we got variables here. But we could say in the context that maybe we created a ChatGPT block for the purpose of coming up with article titles or article topics, we would add a line that essentially says never repeat the same article topic. And you'll learn this in the course later on, so you'll see more in depth on this. But essentially what this does for us is that we wouldn't have, our article come out on Monday and then Sunday that same week, it's the exact same topic. By having a memory key here, we can use contextual information that was said in the past in order to ensure variety of output. What does that mean for you? That means we can really ensure quality with our outputs when it comes to scale. And when you deal with multiple clients, you don't have to worry about XYZ client being like, we already had this article incur 2 weeks ago. Now you can ensure that the variety of topics will stay true and consistent with the businesses you do business with. Now you have a good idea on formatting. Let's go ahead and run through some tricks here that you can do with ChatGPT in order to ensure more effective outputs. Let's start off by understanding how to maybe take a large piece of data, make it more digestible for GPT, therefore having a better output. So for this example, let's go ahead and upper model to GPT 3.5 16K. And what we're going to do here is essentially we're going to say generate 400 words about on a made up kid story. So essentially, let's just create a lot of data right now. So then we can use it in our next block. So we're going to do that. And I might have needed to increase the max tokens here, but let's go ahead and see. Perfect. So as you see here, we got a lot of data, a lot of text. Now, when you deal with that much data, whether it's from a Google Doc or a PDF, there are two main reasons why you wouldn't want to input that into a ChatGPT block that is running on GPT-4. That is going to be cost and effectiveness of output. First reason of cost is that ChatGPT-4, every single one of those characters are going to be charged at a 0.06 cent rate compared to a GPT 3.5, which is 0.002. The second reason is we want more effective outputs here. So let's go ahead and show you a cool little trick that we can use 3.5 in pair of 4 in order to handle this data better. I'll go ahead and create a ChatGPT block here. We're going to do an event of conversation, continue. And we're going to do based off this story, input all that data that we just had here. Come down here, we're going to up it to 3.5 16K because we are dealing with more data in this context, and 16K can handle more data. We're going to say generate the 3 main points, parameters, max 1 sentence. We'll do one to 2 one sentence. Sometimes GPT gets a little crazy per point. And then we're going to continue and test this action. Now, whatever context you may be digesting the data for, you would make that the main point that you want to come out of the next flow here. This is due to the fact that maybe you're siphoning through a PDF and you want to have, maybe the 4 main points about X, Y, Z, therefore grabbing all that, and you want to have GPT-4 search the PDF. All right, so as you see here, we got our 3 main points. So then what you would do with the digestible data that you just received is you would add another ChatGPT block here, and we would do a conversation, and then we can now up it to GPT-4. The more cost strenuous model, but the more effective model when it comes to comprehension. So if I do GPT-4 here, and we go ahead and say, based off the summary of this story, semicolon parentheses, input this. We're going to say, maybe the comprehension in this level is going to say generate a 6-question quiz, multiple choice. And there you go. Essentially, now, whatever the comprehension level task that you usually associate with GPT, is going to be able to take the relevant data that's important for that task and now generate with it at a lot better. Now, the next thing we're going to show you is the ability to output longer forms of text using the GPT-4 model. And we go really in depth on this on our AI article generator video, so make sure to check that out. But we're going to show you a real quick example here. Essentially, what I mean by this is that no matter how high you put your max token usage, there are certain contexts where when using the GPT-4 model, and even when using the GPT 3.5 model, it will just stop the output outright in center. It wouldn't give you a full output. And what I mean by this is, let's say we're using GPT-4 and we're like, generate a 2,000 word article. It wouldn't be able to do that because it would probably stop, maybe 600, 700 words in. So in this context, here's what we're going to do. We can go ahead and say, generate a 1,000 word story. And in our AI article video, it's going to be a lot more complex than this, but we'll just do it for this. Generate a 1,000 word story. And then we're going to say parameter. This is part 1. Okay. And then we're going to go ahead and hit continue here. Let's go ahead and actually change the memory key. Continue here, test action. All right, so as you see here, we got the output. Let's go ahead and see how many words that was. So we go over here and copy this. So I pasted in here, and as you see, the output reached 430 words. So now you're at a conundrum where you're just like, okay, great, but I need this hit 1,000. Why didn't it hit 1,000? Let's go ahead and jump back over to Zapier. Here is the really cool trick here. And obviously, we would need to probably format our user messages a little bit better here. But for now, just to show you this use case, essentially what we can do here is we're going to say, we are generating a story. This is part 1, semicolon. And due to the fact that we did a 1,000 word story, and this is basically 500 words, we're just going to go ahead and input the initial story here. Make sure we find it within the parentheses. We're going to say, generate the conclusion of this story. And here's what's really cool here. We're going to go ahead and upper model to GPT-4. Hit continue. Let's go ahead and test this action. So we have the context of part 1 of the story. Go ahead and generate the other part of the story. Now you might be saying to yourself, Corbin, didn't you just say we don't want to use a ton of data when we input for GPT-4 models? I did say this. So you have 2 options. The first option is you maintain it like this. You'll be fine. It will just be a little bit more expensive. Your second option is go back to that strategy I showed you before. Input a 3.5 block in between these blocks, summarize this for the main points, and then proceed that way. Choose whichever you prefer. And here we go. So the end of the part 1 was in a cavernous room. Then as you see, in a cavernous room, and it continues a story all the way to the end. And so it ended, the legend of the inverted tower, and so on. Really cool stuff. If you found what was in this video really cool, I implore you to watch our video here where we're looking at the AI article generator, where we do a lot of the stuff described here and we put it to work on a real AI automation you can start selling to a business. But without further ado, let's go ahead and check out our next lesson here, where we're going to be looking at Zapier blocks and why they're so fundamental for data outputs with ChatGPT.